Oh, hey there, boys and ghouls. Are you ready for a bedtime story? My name's Megan, if you're new here, and if not, welcome back to Here She Lies, a fact or fiction horror podcast that will have you questioning everything you once held dear. Each week, we'll explore another heart-stopping tale of terror. Some of them are true, and others are just big fat fibs. It's up to you to decide which is which. If you're watching over on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. And if you're tuning in via your favourite podcast app, then don't forget to leave a big, sexy 5-star review. Remember to have your say either in the comments box below or by heading over to our Instagram page at Here She Lies Podcast. Now, before we get down to business, it's time to reveal the answer for last week's show, a secret for Santa. Let me remind you of the charming Caruso family, a hard-working bunch who were down on their luck until a little boy decided to share his damning secret with the man he thought was Santa Claus. Turns out his father was an abusive piece of shit who left his wife and the mother of his children to perish in the family shed in below freezing temperatures. Now, I know this one caused quite a bit of confusion in the comments. Everyone was saying, Megan, it sounds so real, it must be true. But was that my intention all along? Just kidding, it was 100% true. Yeah. This case actually took place just outside of Manchester in the December of 2010. Now, for the privacy of those involved, certain names were changed, but I can tell you that the psychotic husband and almost murderer was arrested and later charged with domestic abuse, child abuse, grievous bodily harm, and here's the kicker. Police discovered a copious amount of heroin on the property, so he was also charged with possession and intent to sell. The restaurant from the story did receive a lot of positive free press after the incident, but unfortunately, like so many others, during the pandemic they were forced to close their doors, and sadly they never reopened. So it turns out this was a sad wee story all round, and I can only hope that the kids and their mother were able to heal and move on from what was probably the worst Christmas of their lives. But as one little troll said last week, Megan Hun, Christmas is over. So it's time for us to put away the festive fables and open up a brand new storybook. Welcome everyone to episode 4 of Here She Lies. I call this one Happy Birthday.
911, what's your emergency?
You calling me a liar?
Oh my god, you coming? We are coming.
Birthdays. An endless parade of gifts, balloons, and uneaten cake covered in melted candle wax. Everyone reacts differently to their big special day. To some, it's just another 24 hours. No big deal. But to others, it's all they can talk about for months on end. If you're a fan of Bravo's Vanderpump Rules, then you really know the type. Yeah, these people really choose to ignore the fact that it's meant to be a birthday. I mean, it's not that hard. It's literally in the name. Now, before the events that began on June 27th, 2011, Cara Stevens was one of those insufferable people. Born to a wealthy family in central London, she was granted the privilege of having childhood birthday parties that only most children her age could dream of. Growing up, Cara's close friends knew to keep a note of June 27th in their calendars, or prepare to suffer her wrath. Each year more extravagant than the last, it became clear that Cara Stevens was in fact the birthday queen, and didn't she know it? Now, I know you're probably thinking, what an entitled little brat, right? Then you'd have our leading lady all wrong. You see, for Cara, these elaborate celebrations were evidence of something else, an emptiness and a desperate need to feel included. As a teen, she'd struggled to make friends. Cara was always friendly and always willing to get involved in class, but for some reason the girls at school only seemed to take an interest when that particular date in June rolled back around. It was no secret that the Stevens threw the most lavish parties for their daughters, and truth be told, it was the only time anyone specifically came to see Cara at that house. Were those girls her friends? No, not really. And Cara wasn't naive to that fact. As the years rolled by, the birthday parties grew in their decadence, and slowly the kids who once tormented little Cara Stevens realised that by being her friend, they too could enjoy some pretty nice perks. Cara wasn't a stupid young woman. Deep down, she knew why she suddenly found herself hanging with the popular crowd. However, just as she had told herself as a child, she wasn't alone anymore. And that was good enough. In the spring of 2017, a now 21-year-old Cara was taking a step that most girls her age dreaded. She was getting ready to leave university and enter the world of work. She'd had a few part-time jobs before, but this was her first chance at a proper career. Her parents had high hopes for their eldest daughter, and they were more than thrilled when she received an internship at a local and reputable newspaper. Although still very young, Cara was like a little old lady trapped in a youthful body, and she was looking forward to this mature new chapter in her life. During her final years at St. Martin's Ladies' College, the polished veneer she'd spent almost a decade perfecting had started to crack. By nature, Cara was an introverted old soul. She loved to read 1920s mystery novels and tour dilapidated churchyards, soaking in as much of their haunted history as she could. Hobbies that for several years she'd managed to hide from her cooler peers. But recently she'd grown tired of her duplicitous lifestyle. Perhaps tired wasn't the right word to use, because actually she was downright exhausted. Playing Cara Stevens by day and whichever version of herself her friends longed for by night had taken its toll, and it was safe to say that within each performance, Cara had gotten a little bit lost. So, when she walked through the gigantic glass revolving door of the Metropolitan Times, she dropped her shoulders in relief. Maybe, just maybe, within this huge transparent space, she could finally be her authentic self. For her first day, she'd opted for an outfit her favourite fictional television character would have been proud of. A tweed headband with a flash of Tiffany blue sat snug above her perfectly blow-dried fringe. An 11-year-old Cara would often sneak downstairs for a glass of milk whilst her mother Jules indulged in her weekly guilty pleasure. Gossip Girl. Obviously, the saucy goings-on of these Upper East Side millennials weren't suitable for the eyes of an impressionable preteen, so they reached a compromise. Cara would pretend that she'd fallen asleep on the sofa next to her mother after a cup of warm milk, and Jules would pretend that she couldn't see her daughter peeking out from under her blanket when she was supposed to be in bed. It was during these secret late night hangouts that Cara was introduced to Blair Waldorf, played by the stunning Leighton Meester. Blair, the daughter of a famous fashion designer, was everything that Cara wished she could be. Confident, stylish, and a bit of a bitch. For someone like Cara, who lived her life to be accepted, Blair's ability to command a room with her mean girl attitude was downright inspirational. She told her mum Jules that she could never be a Blair. She was too shy, too weak, and too afraid. And that's when Jules Stevens sat up on their luxurious forest green corner sofa and imparted some words of wisdom. She confidently said, "Fake it till you make it, my love." And so, that's exactly what she did. No one at school knew what had prompted the shift in Cara Stevens' demeanour over that 2-week winter break, but one thing was for certain: she came back different. Now, once again, many moons later, Cara found her mother's words ringing in her ears. The old her would have run out that colossal building screaming with her tail between her legs. But no, today was a new day, and until her nerves calmed down a bit, she would just have to take Mum's advice and channel some of that classic BW attitude. As far as first days go, it went pretty well. Cara was introduced to a couple of junior editors and fellow interns, and even agreed to after-work drinks with some of the younger crowd. It was nice to spend some time with people outside her usual circle. It was even nicer that she didn't have to pretend. Like Cara, her colleagues expressed an interest in literature and history, and that night she felt more like herself than she had in years. What a way to start the week. And Cara had a feeling it would only get better, because tomorrow was June 27th, and tomorrow it would be her 22nd birthday. She hadn't planned anything special. Her parents always did that for her, and she had no doubt that this year would be exactly the same. The same ostentatious balloon arch outside the front entrance of her childhood home, the same cupcake tower from Peggy Portion's bakery, the same fake friends and their disingenuous well wishes. Was she growing tired of the big show or just growing up? She couldn't say for sure, but for the first time in a long while, Cara felt an overwhelming sense of dread waiting for the clock to strike midnight. The next day was a Tuesday, and also Cara's second day as a promising new intern. She couldn't believe how uneasy she'd felt pushing through those steel security barriers just 24 hours before. Today, she was experiencing something else. Excitement, maybe? She hadn't told any of her new colleagues that it was her birthday. Cara didn't want them to feel like they had to do anything when they'd hardly known her for a whole day. Just a regular 9 to 5 shift at the office. Or so she initially thought. As she settled at her desk, her heart began to race when she noticed a beautiful bouquet of flowers. A stunning arrangement of lilies, orchids, and roses, their vibrant colours and fragrant scent filling the room. Panic surged through her as she realised that these flowers had been delivered to her work, right at her desk. She scanned the office, but there was no one nearby who seemed responsible for the surprise gift. Hands trembling, she grabbed the little white card attached, although she already knew what it would say. Just 2 words: Happy birthday. Over the years, she'd received these mysterious birthday bouquets, always beautifully arranged, but always from an anonymous sender. The first few years, she'd been flattered by the attention, assuming it was a secret admirer who'd lacked the courage to reveal themselves. But as time passed, the lack of a name or any other identifying information became increasingly unnerving. Since Cara had turned 16, she'd spent her birthdays and the weeks that followed hunting for clues. She had no idea who could be behind it, and slowly the thought of a stalker began to gnaw at her sanity. Having already interrogated most of her immediate family and her entire friend group about the bizarre gifts, she knew the sender wasn't someone involved in her everyday life. Something that she'd discovered in her investigations was that the little white cards tucked in each bouquet were handwritten by her potential stalker. The flower shops where they were purchased from changed, but the angry scribble of those two words never did. A firm hand on Cara's shoulder shocked her out of her haze. "Are you all right?" It was Fiona, the woman who cleaned the office in the mornings. She hadn't even noticed she was crying until she felt the warmth of the tear caress her left cheek. Determined to not look like a nut job on her second day, Cara politely excused herself and went to the bathroom to calm down. There she racked her brain. How could they have found her here? Understandably, over the course of the last 6 years, she'd become increasingly more cautious about who she shared her personal information with. The only people who knew about her new job at the paper were her parents and little sister, all of whom had witnessed the increasing terror brought on by the fragrant deliveries each passing year. She'd been so careful, never posting online or telling her friends, but once again, they'd found her. At first, it hadn't been so bad. It was actually quite nice, the thought of someone out there who wanted to treat you and appreciate you. But then came the phone calls. Cara's heart thudded in her chest as the laboured, heavy breathing echoed through the receiver. The calls continued until midnight, until her birthday was officially over. Initially, back in 2011, these interactions left her trembling, feeling frightened and violated, always from an unknown number and always with that same chilling breath on the other end. She hoped, perhaps somewhat naively, that they would someday stop, that whoever was doing this would get bored and move on. But one bunch of flowers turned into 2, then 4, 5, 6, and eventually the bouquets and those horrific calls that followed were as inevitable as the birthdays themselves. This past year, Cara had finally bitten the bullet and changed her phone number again, handing it out only to a select few, making them promise they wouldn't pass it on to anyone else. She knew how crazy she sounded to those out of the loop, but at this point, and after spending the bulk of her teens living in fear, she really didn't care. Whoever this person was, they had somehow managed to insert themselves into the centre of Cara's life. The anxiety these encounters brought with them left her psychologically crippled, often too nervous to even step outside her own front door. They were nowhere, but somehow everywhere. And despite her best efforts, Cara was powerless to stop them. Gradually, those feelings of paranoia infected her friendships, and one by one, Cara's so-called besties stopped answering her texts. How could it be that this complete stranger simultaneously played a leading role in the soap opera that was now her life? After a short moment of contemplation, Cara mustered the strength to peel herself off of the toilet and splash some cold water on her face, which had faded to a chalky grey colour at the sight of her new desk decor. The years of torment had taken their toll on the 22-year-old aspiring journalist, and it was safe to say that the fresh face glow she'd once possessed was long gone. Haggard was the word her friend Melissa had used, and looking back at herself now in the bathroom mirror, Cara was struggling to disagree. As she walked through the crowded office space, she did her best to plaster on a smile. Of course, this recent delivery had scared her, but she didn't feel the need to share the inner details of her dramatic life after just 2 days on the job. Cara's game face was one she'd been perfecting since childhood. She'd never had any real friends, and in some twisted way, this person was perhaps more dedicated to being close to her than anyone else ever had been. This very thought made Cara shudder, wondering in the last 6 years just how close her stalker had gotten. Relieved to finally reach her pokey desk nestled away in the corner of the room, she sank into her black leather chair, hoping to bury all thoughts of a sinister perpetrator within her work. But just as her index fingers stroked the keyboard, a shrill ring came from the telephone beside her. It took a couple of seconds for this to register, and it was only the concerned looks of Cara's co-workers that prompted her to pick up the receiver. The heavy breathing seemed louder, more ominous this time. Completely forgetting her surroundings, she shouted into the phone, "Who are you? And why are you doing this?" However, instead of the usual silence following her question, a guttural whisper, barely audible, slithered through the phone.
"I'm watching you, Cara. Always watching."
Her blood ran cold instantly, and panic seized her. She immediately hung up, her hands shaking violently. Tears welled in her eyes as she dialed 999, her fellow employees watching on in disbelief. With her voice still quivering, she explained the terrifying call to the dispatcher on the other end. A small crowd had now gathered around Cara's little desk, some concerned, others excitedly bathing in the drama of it all. It was only as the emergency dispatcher talked her down that Cara realised how much attention she'd drawn to herself. Her bloodshot eyes darted around the office when she noticed those giggling in the back. She had to get out of here. And fast. Back behind the locked doors of her family home, Cara was finally able to gather her thoughts. She was so frustrated with herself for what had just taken place. Another opportunity ruined, another humiliation at the hands of this predator. Later that evening, in between the usual disturbing calls that poured through the landline, Cara received word from the local police station. They were letting her know that unfortunately they had been unsuccessful in their attempts to trace the earlier call. Big surprise. Every year the Stevens reported the incidents to law enforcement, and every year they received the same response. In the spring of 2014, a 19-year-old Cara had even been scolded for wasting police time. Since that event, she'd had little to no faith in the justice system, or in the fact that it would protect her from her faceless tormentor. As she sat wrapped in her duvet in her childhood bedroom, Cara realised that she'd never felt so alone. Her parents thankfully cancelled the surprise party they'd been meticulously planning for the last 4 months. The last thing she wanted to do right now was fake a smile at her fake friends who could easily turn up for a goodie bag but couldn't return a phone call to save their lives. Birthdays had always been Cara's escape, the only time when she felt wanted and like she mattered to those around her. But slowly, this monster had stripped that away from her too, and now it felt like there was nothing. She was well aware that her parents already thought she was nuts. She'd spent many a sleepless night crouched on the staircase, clinging to the banister as they whispered in hushed tones, what were they going to do about Cara? The drop-ins from concerned loved ones had dried up around 2015, and Cara didn't blame them. Most birthdays she was practically catatonic, waiting up till 12 a.m. with her mother's sharpest kitchen knife tightly gripped in her right hand. The fear that they would one day come for her left her on edge, and to be honest, pretty unpleasant to be around. Her own little sister even started to withdraw from her. It was too painful to see Cara slowly fading away. It was in that moment that the newly 22-year-old Cara realised that whilst her stalker may have left her with nothing, she also now had nothing to lose. She'd wasted the last 6 years of her life searching for answers, questioning friends, pushing away potential new connections. And for what purpose? He, she, whoever was still here, and she was no closer to uncovering their identity than she was in 2011. She knew she had one chance left to turn things around. She had to run. Grabbing only the essentials, Cara began packing a small bag. It's funny how cutthroat you become when you know your safety is on the line. Obviously, under different circumstances, she would have spent days organising all of her old keepsakes and trinkets. But sadly, that experience of moving out for the first time was just another thing Cara's stalker had stolen from her. As she snuck past the living room door, she lingered for a second, wondering if she should say something. Maybe give her mum one last hug? No, she decided she needed to leave and that it was now or never. So, with a heavy heart, Cara crept out of the home that she'd slept in since she was 2 years old and stole away into the thick black night. In a private location miles from the city, Cara found solace in isolation. She installed security cameras around her new home, constantly checking her surroundings, always vigilant. When she finally mustered up the courage to purchase a new mobile phone, every ring sent shivers down her spine. Days turned into weeks, and gradually the memory of those calls diminished. Cara's sense of normalcy slowly returned, new friendships were made, and new love was found. From time to time, she would see something that would remind her of her life back home. But that was a different world, and in truth, a different Cara. It definitely was a process, but after a few years went by, she eventually started to celebrate her birthday again. With no flowers allowed, of course, a request that her husband Henry was happy to oblige. It was a funny and unusual little life, but it was theirs. And soon after Miss Stevens became Mrs. Lawson, it was someone else's too. Noelle Simone Lawson was born on February the 8th, 2023, to her very proud parents. The birth was so quick and came and went with no major hiccups or medical complications. Nothing like the nightmare Cara had been preparing herself for. And, of course, the gas and air helped a bit. The young couple almost passed out from shock when a jolly maternity nurse informed them with a smile that they could take baby Noelle home that same day. An apprehensive Cara was flooded with new mum anxiety. Looking after a baby in a hospital surrounded by medical professionals seemed like a much better idea. This was their first time as mummy and daddy, and she wasn't too proud to admit that they didn't have a clue. Later that afternoon, Cara looked on as her handsome husband gently clicked their baby girl's car seat into place. Internally, she asked, "How did I get so bloody lucky?" It was around 5:45 p.m. when they pulled up to their house tucked away in the English countryside. Wincing in pain, she stepped onto the gravel driveway, making her way towards the porch, when she was stopped dead in her tracks. Beads of sweat seeped from the base of her neck, down past her shoulder blades. Henry carried a sleeping Noel from the car to find his wife frozen just yards away from their front door. All of the colour had drained from her normally flushed rosy cheeks. Her eyes were wide in what appeared to be sheer terror, and they were fixed on a small bouquet of roses perched at the top of the steps. Around her, everything started to melt into one big mess. Henry's voice was dull and low, but she couldn't work out what he was actually saying. She moved closer to the pink arrangement, and as she did, the world crumbled till there was nothing left but Cara and the flowers that sat there taunting her with their sickly sweet aroma. Sticking out was a ragged piece of card. She picked it up, although deep down she already knew what it would say. There, in the same black smudged ink that had plagued her young life, were 3 words.
Happy birthday, Noel.
The end. Oh no, it looks as though Cara's stalker has tracked her down again. But who was he? And why this strange obsession with birthdays? Does this story sound familiar? Statistics do show that 1 in 12 women will be stalked in their lifetime. But was Cara Stevens one of them? I guess you'll just need to wait and find out in next week's episode. Now guys, I will apologise if I've sounded like a giant snot monster. I've got a cheeky sinus infection, okay? So before you head off to bed and I drown myself in a bottle of night nurse, it's that time of the night again. It's 2 truths and a lie. If you recall, I came at ya last week with 3 so-called facts. They were: I'm 35 years old, I was born in Scotland, and I was once in a nasty bus crash. And I have to admit, guys, yous were pretty awful. In the words of the boy band The Wanted, it was an all-time low, and I think about 5 people actually got this correctly. So you may be surprised to know that the lie was, I'm 35 years old. Yep, despite my Spanish and Italian heritage, I was born and bred in Glasgow, Scotland. And a big shout out to the OGs who remembered me saying that in a video from like 2021 when the lighting was shocking at best, and I think my microphone was actually taped to the wall. And since we're quoting pop songs today for no reason, I'm a survivor. I ain't gonna give up, because I was in a bus crash in Italy in 2007. Long story short, I was on a school trip, the bus flipped over, I'm still alive. Now, I'm sure you're all asking, if you're not 35, what age are you? And to that, I will say, I'll never tell. But I do have a brand new trifecta of secrets just for you. 1, I once had a stalker who told everyone I was his girlfriend even though I'd never met him before. 2, I've been married twice. And 3, I once dumped a guy because he wore the same aftershave as my dad. So on that deceitful note, I bid you adieu. Find out next week if it was false or if it was true. Good night.
911, what's your emergency?
You calling me a liar?
Oh my god, you coming?
We are coming.